The Honorable Trent Franks represents Arizona's 8th Congressional District, serving in Congress since 2003. Prior to coming to Washington, Representative Franks was president of Liberty Petroleum Corporation, a small oil exploration company established in 1996. He had previously held positions in the Arizona State Legislature and in the Governor's Office for Children. Since coming to Congress, Representative Franks has been an advocate for robust preparation against a potential EMP event, natural or man-made. He launched the Congressional EMP Caucus and has pushed for passage of the Secure High Voltage Infrastructure for Electricity from Lethal Damage Act or the SHIELD Act. Thank you for being here. Your full written statement will appear in the record. The Chair now recognizes Mr. Franks for his testimony.
My witnesses always do the same thing. Good afternoon, Chairman Perry and Ranking Member Clark and fellow distinguished members on the committee. I believe the subject of this hearing today is one of profound implication and importance to our country, and I'm very grateful to you for allowing me to testify. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, America is so reliant on our electric grid that we specifically consider it, quote, critical infrastructure. With each passing year, our society becomes increasingly dependent on technology and an abundant supply of electricity. Our household appliances, food distribution systems, telephone and computer networks, communication devices, water and sewage plants would all grind to a halt without electric power. At the same time, the use of modern computerized control systems, along with the increased size and integration of our grid, has made it far more vulnerable to electromagnetic pulse or geomagnetic disturbance than ever before. Consequently, nearly every single facet of modern human life in America is now susceptible to being crippled by a major natural or man-made EMP event. And nearly every space weather and EMP expert recognizes the dramatic disruptions and cataclysmic collapses these pulses can potentially bring to electric grids. In 2004 and 2008, the EMP Commission, which some of the members of that will be here today, testified before those of us on the Armed Services Committee that the U.S. society and economy are so critically dependent upon the availability of electricity that a significant collapse of the grid precipitated by a major natural or man-made event, EMP or otherwise, could result in catastrophic civilian casualties. Let me say that again. Could result in catastrophic civilian casualties. That conclusion is echoed by separate reports recently compiled by the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Energy, and National Academy of Sciences, along with various other government agencies and independent researchers. We now have 11 governmental agencies' studies on the severe threat and vulnerabilities we face from EMP and GMD, all of which came to very similar conclusions. In fact, you should have in front of you booklets both from the Center for Security Policy and the Heritage Foundation that gives some insight into some of these studies. We as a nation have spent billions of dollars over several decades hardening our nuclear triad, our missile defense capabilities, and numerous other critical elements of our national security apparatus against the effects of electromagnetic pulse, particularly the type of electromagnetic pulse that might be deliberately generated against us by an enemy. However, our civilian grid, upon which the Department of Defense relies upon for nearly 99% of its electricity needs, is completely vulnerable to the same kind of danger. Mr. Chairman, our enemies are actually and acutely aware of that vulnerability, and it constitutes, in my opinion, an invitation to them to use the asymmetric capacity of an EMP weapon against us should they choose to do so. To address this national security threat, Chairman Pete Sessions and I have introduced the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act, H.R. 3410, which is now before your committee. And we would like to specifically thank Ranking Member Yvette Clark for co-sponsoring this critical legislation. H.R. 3410 enhances the Department of Homeland Security's threat assessments for geomagnetic disturbances and electromagnetic pulse blackouts, which will enable practical steps to protect the electric grid that serves our nation. This legislation will also help the United States prepare for such an event by including potential large-scale extended blackouts into existing national planning scenarios. It allows us to plan for protecting and recovering the electric grid and other critical infrastructure from an EMP event. Perhaps most importantly, Mr. Chairman, it advances an awareness program to educate and I hope motivate all of us inside and outside of government to proactively protect against this potentially devastating danger to our country. In closing, Mr. Chairman, let me suggest to you all that there is a moment in the life of nearly every problem when it is big enough to be seen and still small enough to be addressed. I believe we now live in that moment as it relates to the threat of natural or weaponized EMP. The challenge to ultimately and comprehensively protect our people and nation from all of the various perils of natural or man-made EMP will be long and lingering. But the time to protect our nation from the most devastating scenario is now. The threat is real, and the implications are profoundly sobering. Your actions today to protect America may gain you no fame or fanfare in the annals of history. However, it may happen in your lifetime that a natural or man-made EMP event so big has an effect so small that no one but a few will recognize the disaster that was averted. And for the sake of our children and future generations, I pray it happens exactly that way. And I thank you, and God bless you all.